And this is from the part of the regular parsha. What they say, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's talking about political power, right? Being in the Rabbanus is different. Okay, the rabbinate is kind of strange because let's say you take on the job of Rav Ha'ir and you're in charge of Batei Din, or even Rav Rashi. The Yetzer HaRa there is different. Person becomes chief rabbi. He's obviously not looking to be prime minister. It's a different position altogether. And usually you have to be someone who knows a thing or two. All right. The current chief rabbis are they're scholars. They're really holding. They know more than I do. I might not agree with all their positions, but they are who they are, right? So they have a different Yetzer HaRa. Moshe Rabbeinu says, appointing judges, this week's parsha, he needs to find men who are honest. What's the Yetzer HaRa of being in the rabbinate? Like Rabbi Soloveitchik said, you can't be honest to yourself. There's bribes. Rabbi Soloveitchik turned down, remember we discussed this, he turned down the opportunity to be chief rabbi of Israel. In the 1930s, he was a candidate for the chief rabbinate of Jaffa. That's when he came to Eretz Yisrael. In the 1950s, his name came up again, but this time as a candidate for actual chief rabbi of the whole country. And he turned it down. Why did he turn it down? Because like being the Rav Mitam, what we say the Rav Mitam is, Mitam HaMemshala. In, let's say, Tsarist Eastern Europe, they had rabbis who were officially recognized by the regime. But those rabbis had their halachic hands tied, so to speak. That's a figurative expression, not literally. They didn't actually tie up their hands. That'd be handcuffing them. So they figuratively had their hands tied. So I'm just giving an example. Okay. So what they couldn't take certain halachic positions. And even, by the way, nowadays, in Rabbi Soloveitchik's time in the 1950s, and in our generation, 70 years later, it's the same thing. The chief rabbis cannot take certain positions. They're not supposed to get involved in certain things, right? And sometimes you might have a position. I know someone who was put into this position. By the way, sometimes you position that opinions, and sometimes you position as in circumstances. He's in a circumstance where he realizes that perhaps part of the kingmakers, give him his own rabbanus, are themselves unsavory characters and not worthy of it. There's frauds. Some people, once you get into the rabbinate, you can't start calling out those who are fakes. I, for example, thought that if you want legitimacy, you want to put out Sfarim, you want to teach in yeshiva, you have to do the work, you have to take the tests, you have to get the piece of paper. You need a real legitimate smicha. My father-in-law thought that way. You got to get it, and then you start teaching. You realize there are some people who just did the quickie thing, like just got someone to sign a paper. They never did the test. They're not really into it, or somehow they took a test but they faked it. They don't know. There's nothing up here. They know how to repeat things, like we mentioned last week, but they don't know how to process anything. Or they're actually corrupt. They're Balei Avera. They're not role models. That is the corruption or the Yetzer HaRa when you're in the rabbinate. When you get power, political power, the Yetzer HaRa is what? What's the main Yetzer HaRa of political power? More power, more money, more way to control people. When you're in the rabbinate, you're tempted in different ways. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu was saying. When you need to appoint judges, you have to find the types of people who they suddenly won't find the Yetzer HaRa. I think I told my wife yesterday, I had a new Yetzer HaRa, I felt. It wasn't as strong as the usual Yetzer HaRa. Everybody here knows the Yetzer HaRa. You know how powerful it is. You know how much space it takes up your mind. You know how much time you give to that Yetzer HaRa. You know what you do to control it. Learning how to control your Yetzer HaRa is, I guess, easier if you always know that God's in front of you. Shavisi Hashem. If you could properly understand that God's with you at all times, you would never come to sin. You would have the proper fear of God, and also probably even get to that love of God that the rabbi was talking about recently, and then you wouldn't be doing anything wrong. But many of us have a human mind. Many of us sleep sometimes, and they're subconscious. The Yetzer HaRa is there. So I would encounter the Yetzer HaRa. I didn't even know I had it. I felt it for like a minute or two. Like, wow, I have Yetzer HaRa for this. It wasn't powerful. It didn't lead to any actions. I was very surprised I actually had that there. It was very strange to discover this. People who get into position of power, I believe that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was alluding to this. We talked about, the mashal with Vespasian, that suddenly his shoe didn't fit. Right? You guys know what I'm talking about. At the time of the Churban, he came to Vespasian at the siege of Jerusalem and told him he's going to be emperor because you're the one destroying Jerusalem. Must be you're a melech already. Oh, I'm just a general. No, you're going to message from Rome. Now you're the new Roman emperor. Leave Titus in charge. So his shoe didn't fit. He suddenly got godless, and suddenly the shoe doesn't fit anymore. In American idiom, the shoe fitting and big shoes to fill, right, is a muscle for what? Becoming fit for the position, right? This, and by the way, position I mean, and not circumstances and not opinion, but the job. Okay, so the word position in English. Okay, many different, and by the way, there's also the literal position. Are we sitting or standing? Okay, so that some of us, when we suddenly find ourselves in such a position, a new position, the Yetzer haras are new. I would imagine that, that's what they say. That which you see down there is not what you see here. So that the same thing happens. It affects Rabbanim also. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu was worried about. This is the second aliyah on this week's annual parsha. You have to watch out. Suddenly you're in charge. You get a whole new slew of Yetzer haras you didn't even know you had. A lot of people do it. They become the director of the board of something or other, and this organization collects funds, right? So what happens? Suddenly there's a guy in charge. He made him treasurer or something. He's the one in charge of the money, and he has to distribute the money, and he has the checkbook. And what happens to people in those positions? So, yeah, or they just start taking the money themselves. A lot of people do that. So, and being in positions of rabbinic leadership, as Moshe Rabbeinu was pointing out, has the same thing. You need to find men who are known and uncorruptible to be in charge.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.